All right, so good evening, good afternoon, no matter where it is that you're tuning in from. Welcome to our fifth Future of Industry live podcast event. So happy to have all of you here, and thank you so much. If this is your first time joining us, we really appreciate you joining. If this is not, and this is your second, third, or 20th time, so happy to have you back. I am your host, Brian Antolin, the program manager at LineRun, and we are so excited to have three incredibly innovative and passionate experts joining us this evening to share their insight and perspective on the future of machine learning. They include Divya Venugopalan, software engineer for machine learning from LinkedIn, Jeff Sternberg, technical director, applied AI at Google Cloud Office of the CTO, and NiharRajana, applied scientist at Amazon. So before we get to learn a little bit more about each of them and also their thoughts, opinions, and experiences in machine learning, we're going to talk a little bit about us and what we do. LineRun is an experiential career and industry education platform for tomorrow's workforce. We empower our community of leaders to connect, innovate, and grow through media, events, and programs such as today's session. We invite you to check out our website, www.linerun.co, to learn more about our podcasts, classes, and career accelerator programs. LineRun. With that, we'll have each of our speakers introduce themselves and share a little bit more about who they are, what they're doing, and their interests in machine learning and why they got into it. And we'll start tonight with Divya.
Hi everyone, this is Divya Venugopalan. I am a machine learning engineer at LinkedIn. I work in the People You May Know team, which is responsible for generating the recommendations that of people that you may want to connect with on LinkedIn. And I'm also involved in the fairness efforts, fairness in ML and AI efforts at LinkedIn. So that's what I work on now. And how I got interested is has been mostly in when I was in undergrad. I really wanted to have this. I was reading about democracy and how a lot of people are involved in making decisions for ourselves and not just like one person, right? So when we think of many decisions, we don't want just one person to make the decision for the world. So basically data, and through machine learning we can get a lot of opinions and input from different people and then make a decision. So that's why I'm excited, like want to got into machine learning and got to know more about it, and I'm here right now. Yeah, that's it from me. I'm thank you, Brian, for having me here, and excited to talk to all of you.
Thank you, Divya. And next we'll hear from Jeff.
Thanks, Brian, and great to meet everyone. Great to be here today. My name is Jeff Sternberg, and as mentioned, I'm at Google Cloud in the Office of the CTO. We're a group that acts as technical advisors to some of our largest and most strategic customers. And I partner with them quite a lot on innovation projects, collaboratively and helping businesses think about cloud strategy. I got interested in machine learning actually via data science and data engineering and analytics, which I was doing earlier in my career. I worked on SQL databases and data warehouses, and I started to get into dashboards. And I realized that if we want to be a little bit more predictive about the future, if we want to create really insightful data products that sort of look ahead, machine learning was the way to do it. And actually, Divya, I worked, one of my early projects was actually inspired by people you may know at LinkedIn. It was a companies you may be interested in product. So operated in a pretty similar way, I think, as that recommendation system. Great to be here, everyone. Back to you, Brian.
Jeff, thank you so much. And I think we can all learn from each other and each other's work at some point. Last but definitely not least, we have Sneha.
Hi, everyone. My name is NiharRajana. I'm an applied scientist at Amazon. So I also work on recommendations, the recommendations that you see on retail Amazon website, across the website. What got me interested in machine learning, I think when I was in the third year of my college, I took a natural language processing course and built a chatbot as one of the projects. And I was very interested in like just language processing, as I've always been interested in linguistics and cognitive science. And then I decided to do my master's, where I did a thesis on how do you use deep learning to solve some of the problems related to language understanding. And that's when I decided I wanted to like start my career in machine learning. And that's what brought me here.
Sneha, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So now that we've been able to learn a little bit more about each of you, I think we're going to go dive right in and learn more about how each of you has been able to really adapt and or pivot because of COVID-19 and how that's really affected each of your work. And Jeff, I think we'll start with you. How has the pandemic really changed the dynamic of your work at Google, if at all? And what changes have you and your team had to really make as a result?
Yeah, thanks. You know, like everyone, Google was affected early in the pandemic. From my experience, you know, I was doing a lot of travel and meeting with customers and working in different offices. Obviously, all of that stopped. We made the transition to work from home actually quite seamlessly. I think, you know, Google already had via G Suite and Meet and all of the various collaboration tools that we use. We were able to transition quite well. And in fact, all of those tools saw quite a lot of increased usage early in the pandemic in kind of the March, April timeframe this year. More specifically to sort of machine learning and data science, one of the things that I really liked about how Google thought about the pandemic was via the BigQuery public datasets program. And if you're not familiar with this, this is a way for Google to share public data sets directly over the cloud data warehouse that's called BigQuery. And there are a bunch of COVID-related data sets that have been integrated into this over the last several months. And you can, you know, literally just start querying the data and building models off of it. So that's super helpful. In addition to that, a group in the Google Cloud AI research team started working on and has released a set of COVID forecasts. So these are, you know, 2-week going forward forecasts on the progression of the disease, and that was quite interesting to see develop and be released. And then just more generally in terms of what I've seen with customers, you know, the move to online experiences, such as, you know, with retail and e-commerce, you know, that necessarily means that there's more digital interactions, and that you know leads very quickly to more machine learning needs. So, you know, definitely seen a lot of interest in AI and machine learning as a result of the pandemic because of that shift to online.
Definitely think it makes a lot of sense that you have that natural shift as more people migrate online, and the real rapidness of the situation when we were really all thrown into it in March in the United States. It definitely makes sense that there was this huge demand and huge need for people to better understand how machine learning can help everyone through the situation. So Jeff, really appreciate the insight. Sneha, how did the pandemic really affect you and your team out in Washington with Amazon?
Yeah, I think COVID-19 has affected everyone in different ways. And there's been like a shift in behavior in the way that people shop, or people want to buy things online, maybe the way that they shop for groceries, or they buy certain items more than they buy other items. And a lot of like A/B tests that you do, or any hypothesis-driven experimentation, or the way that machine learning algorithms are taught, are based on like outdated data, right? So as we humans are still settling into all the changes around us, I think it's also important that we update our models with like new behavior that more accurately reflects the current situation. And I think that brings us to like thinking about more importance on like human intervention, and how do we as machine learning scientists make sure that we are able to develop more accurate models that are able to adapt to different situations.
Adaptation is really that key word this year in 2020. It's being able to understand not just your environment and the situation, but also the solution, that bridge in order to get there. So I think that's really powerful insight, and especially for those of you who are really interested in getting into this space. It's all about adapting, and how do you really put things together based on what you're seeing and what you're anticipating. So thank you so much for that. Divya, we'd love to go to you next. And we're talking about COVID, but also this has been a huge, monumental period for innovation in machine learning, especially over the past 18 months, 2 years or so. If you had to point out one thing that excites you today about this field, machine learning, what would it be?
Uh, for me, uh, for me right now, it's actually fairness in machine learning and AI, because we've been having machine learning for so many years, and there's a lot of data that we use. But if you look deeper into it, and we say that, hey, we are getting data from many people, right? But then there could be uh, biases in that data that are coming uh, into our models, and then we might be doing something wrong. For example, say we have a lot of biases in our environment, especially during COVID times. A lot of these are surfacing up in terms of race, in terms of gender, and when we look at the data, many times we don't have representation of uh, some of the groups that we want to protect in our when we say we don't want to use, for example, we don't want to discriminate someone based on their age or gender or race. However, inadvertently we might use a zip code in our data, and then that might end up affecting in very significant ways in like credit systems, in job seeking. For example, right now we want to make sure that especially LinkedIn wants to we have this mission of giving equal opportunity to people with equal talent. Whereas when you say we equal talent, there are, irrespective of their race or their gender, if they have equal talent, they should have the same opportunity as well for a job. Whereas that's not the case many times. So I'm excited to be able to work in this space of trying to find how we can even find how we can even detect and monitor this kind of biases which come in from systemic biases in our environment, so in our actual world, into the data, and reinforce in these machines as well. So that's something that I'm excited about and I want to work on. Yeah.
equalizing the playing field for people is so important, and I definitely think the events of the past few months have really underlined that. So it's really important work that you're doing, Divya. Jeff, we're talking about inclusion, equity. How does that really play into what you're seeing, and what really gets you excited about machine learning today?
Yeah, it's a super important area, and agree with it completely on thinking about fairness and responsibility as we build our AI models and machine learning models. One way that I'm excited about attacking that problem is a discipline called ML ops, or machine learning ops. So if you think about DevOps being the combination of development, software development, and operations, ML ops is similar concept, but around the world of machine learning. And it's a way to continuously deliver, those machine learning models in production. And so we think about, building those pipelines, those machine learning pipelines. An important part of understanding, fairness issues or bias issues that can creep into the system is to have like a continuous evaluation of the model performances. So as you deploy, not just as you deploy, but as you host and as you run an ML system, Google offers, for example, a service that will allow you to sort of continuously evaluate that, sample the prediction input and output, and analyze the performance against your ground truth. So that's an example of kind of a way to implement, a fairness system that I'm excited about. If you think about ML code itself, a lot of people who get started in machine learning, they want to write the code to build the models, train the models, etc. There's actually all these other pieces around it that comprise a machine learning system. From the configuration to the data collection processes and systems to how you extract your features and how you manage the continuation, the continuous environment, how you monitor it over time. So I think ML ops is one thing that I'm excited about, and I think it plays it complements and agree and plays into the same kind of aspects that Divya was talking about with fairness.
I love that. And not so long ago, DevOps was the real hot word because it was brand new and really fused those two parts together. And now that we have ML ops coming online and really gaining prominence and helping that transition, that adaptation period, I definitely think that, you're right in that it's an area to watch, but it's also something that for those of you who are interested in getting into this field, you should really pay careful attention to. Sneha, we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about adaptation. Machine learning is this huge field that's really taken off the past few years. What's the biggest misconception about machine learning that you wish more people understood?
Yeah, that's a good question. The biggest misconception about ML that I wish more people understood is that it's not a black box that's always going to provide a better solution, that's always going to work really well, right? Because a large majority of the problems that we see in industry, I think, can be solved with simple like data analysis or other types of analytics or something simple. So I think it's always good to think about what the problem statement is and what the metrics that we want to track, how we want to solve the problem, and try something simple first. And and if we really think that we could utilize a certain machine learning algorithm that's really going to improve our accuracy while ensuring that we don't spend too much money on it, thinking about the like effort versus cost, like trade-off analysis. There's obviously a lot of human intervention that's also required, a lot of human judgment. A lot of problems don't really have a lot of data available, in which case like a lot of more complex algorithms are not going to work as well as maybe something more simple. So I think that is one misconception that I can think of for that it's not a black box system that solves everything.
really important point. It's definitely not the end all be all. It's really how you apply it and what those end solutions look like. Jeff, do you have anything you'd like to add to what Sneha is saying?
Yeah, I would just add that, machine learning in general is pretty approachable. You don't need a PhD to do it. Even a particularly advanced degree, you can learn it on the job, and you can learn it, approaching machine learning from other disciplines. I have a degree in biology, and I wound up doing it at some point, right? So I think that's the one message I would take away. I think the misconception is that you need to be super advanced, you need to be cutting edge on ML research, and actually as a machine learning practitioner, I think it's fairly accessible.
Accessibility, it really goes into what we were talking about earlier with inclusion and equity, and all these really things that have really come together all at the right time. And Divya, I think there's something you wanted to add as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about like deep learning, right? Like everyone is like, hey, deep learning is the next thing. It's the biggest. We can try it on everything. We should solve every problem with deep learning. Just in general, one misconception is whatever is the next big thing, people try and think that that's what will we need to go to that, and that will solve the problem. But usually a lot of it, like Sneha mentioned as well, depends on the trade-offs. How much data do you have? How much how many the problem itself, what you're trying to solve, what kind of metrics you want to move. So a lot of the model choices depend on the problem and the data and the metrics, and it's probably just you can of course try out everything, but you need to you can make smart judgments without having to like just apply the next biggest thing in all your problems.
I harpen it back to just from hearing all three of you and trying to put the pieces together, like order of operations from a math problem, where you're trying to put things together, but also at the same time, you're trying to figure out what that end result is supposed to be, and trying to really change the order in real time. So for folks who are really interested in, this field and who want to be able to succeed in it, it definitely sounds to me that having a good grasp and being able to be flexible enough to understand what's going on in real time, and being able to adapt is a really important trait. Moving forward from, talking about this in different pieces and what people don't understand, to kind of a forward thinking and what should we be looking towards in the near horizon. Jeff, let's start with you. What are the top 3 trends in machine learning that you see in the field, and what should we be paying attention to?
Yeah, so I would start with the themes that we were just hitting on, which is, I would call responsible AI or AI responsibility. Having explainability, looking at bias, making sure that our ML systems, are equitable in terms of how they handle various groups of people, but make sure that they're human-centered, all of that kind of stuff. Super important to do, and I think maybe a little bit, unfortunately late to the game, that people are starting to think about this, more recently. The second thing I would say is cloud in general. Now maybe I'm biased, of course, but the flexibility of having compute and hardware and infrastructure in a variety of formats and regions around the world. Using things like accelerators, GPUs, TPUs, more scale, granular privileges, data access and privacy, and then of course integrating with other services. I think using machine learning in the cloud is the optimal way to go. And then the third thing I would point out is maybe more, call it industry solutions. So rather than having a generic, one size fits all model or ML system, that covers, customer service, for example, maybe you wrap that in domain specific packaging to solve specific, business use cases, right? That could be in retail, it could be in financial services and manufacturing, other disciplines. I see a trend towards those kind of industry specific solutions in machine learning.
It's wonderful. And, talking about human centric, we're talking about cloud, we're talking about industry adaptation. Sneha, from your perspective, what are you seeing? And is there anything you'd like to add aside from what Jeff has already mentioned?
Yeah, I think a few other things I can add. One is the AutoML. As more people get into machine learning, it's nice to see like tools and frameworks that help people that get into these projects faster by automating a lot of the data cleaning, the feature selection, the model selection kind of tasks. So it makes it more accessible for more people of various backgrounds to get into machine learning, more companies to try out, new methods. That is one. The other thing I think that's more relevant to where we are right now is because there's like not a lot of human contact due to COVID, and a lot of things need to happen in a more automated way without actually meeting face to face. I like that, we're able to use more AI or machine learning practices to sort of help researchers also, whether it is like, doing thermal screening kind of things or data analysis, a lot of natural language processing to understand all of the data that's out there from different countries, from different doctors, from different patients, and how can we help researchers in a better way. I think that is one also kind of like a new trend that's relevant to the space. The third thing I think would be what I find really exciting is conversational AI, as we have more and more like types of data that is available, voice data, other biometric data to create like more personalized experiences.
And especially now where we're looking for ways to reach people if we're companies, and also on an individual basis, we're trying to reach people and understand right away what they like and what they don't like, and have that decision tree being more personalized. It is such an important piece. I'm glad you brought that up. And Divya, from where you sit, anything else you'd like to add in terms of human-centric or the cloud, or how we're pushing the fast forward button because of COVID on all of these innovations happening right now? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, definitely plus one to what Jeff and Sneha said. In terms of human-centric, like there was a lot of in trends in fairness and like accountability, transparency. There were a lot of papers initially like exponentially growing in the just past 2-3 years, and then suddenly a lot more companies trying to make solutions that are scalable for everyone, and that's in terms of fairness and responsible AI as a trend. And to add on to that, one more thing, as we go more personalized, right now there's AI in our watches, in our phone, Siri, or Alexa, everywhere in our homes, right? So privacy is another big concern, and in that space there's a new trend called federated learning, where you are kind of not taking the data out of the system. You are using the model, you're passing the model along into your phone, and that would train for in the model. It's train the model in the phone, and then it would pass it on to the cloud or external to the overall generic model. And then this is how the training can happen across different devices or distributed systems without the data being taken out of the system. So when we have protected systems, say I don't want to share my data from my phone or my watch, or my voice data, or my kids are singing, I don't want to share. Those are very personal. So federated learning kind of helps in protect the privacy and still learn systems across all the data, right? So that's one trend that I just want to add. Yeah.
You really brought up something extraordinarily important, Divya, and we keep talking about, at least through the media and a lot of other discussions, machine learning in its own silo, but it's really all over. And the fact that it's being applied in so many different places in so many different ways, and people don't really understand how it works, but they know it's there. There's always that cloud of uncertainty. So really unpacking it and having a better understanding of how it works can really help ease people's comfort level and also help to really confront those privacy issues that you did mention. So definitely +1 to all of you on those comments, and it's something that we all really need to be aware of. Sneha, I want to go back to you. You know, we're talking about trends, we're talking about issues and things that we all need to be prepared for in the next 18, 24 months. And today we have a lot of early stage professionals who really want to get into this space. For you, what are the top 3 challenges that machine learning professionals have to overcome over the next 3 to 5 years from where you're sitting and what you're seeing right now?
Right. I think we already like Jeff and Divya mentioned this earlier, but also thinking about like bias in our data, especially right now, because the pandemic affects everybody in different ways, whether, depending on your economic conditions, your race, your geographic location, where you live, and availability of the data also. I was earlier reading this article for image detection and how there's only photographs available of a certain race and masks, but not other people. So like we want to be more aware of that, building more explainable AI systems and, taking responsibility as like people in the machine learning field to build more algorithms that can better generalize to the larger population. And those are 2 things. The other thing I think is like subjective tasks, right? Like how do you really capture what customers want, because people have diverse perspectives? How do you really rely on customer feedback, thinking about the intersection or the interactions between UX as well as machine learning systems? How do you make sure that you're able to capture customer feedback or being able to explain the outputs of a machine learning model, and also in real time adapt to what the users or people that are actually impacted by these algorithms actually have a say in how to improve these algorithms.
Definitely. And want to highlight one part of what you just said, and that's responsibility and this growing need for tech companies and also the individuals who power the tech to really understand that it's their responsibility to program the computers and the machines so that we keep the humans as a primary focus and what they need and what they want in real time. And I think following that thread, Jeff, this is definitely along the lines of what we were talking about earlier in your earlier comments on trends. Anything you want to follow up with Sneha's comments?
Yeah, agree completely. So, and I would just add that it's important to be really exact in how you approach explainability and responsibility and building ML systems. So, for example, Google has published a set of AI principles publicly, and there was a ton of thought that was put into creating those, and they're available on the web. And it's things like being socially responsible, socially beneficial. Avoid creating or reinforcing unfair bias, incorporating privacy design principles, and a whole list of things, including things we will not do, right? Including things that Google will not take on with AI. So really, you know, not just like thinking about the privacy aspects or the explainability aspects, but actually putting that into your process, right? Having a set of guidelines and putting the enforcement of that and the review of it into your process. Super challenging and super important. I would just add on top of that, you know, there's a rapid pace of change. There's new models all the time. There's new research. There's new applications. You know, so one thing that I've personally struggled with a bit is balancing, you know, learning new approaches versus implementing existing ones, right? There's sort of the tried and true methodologies that work versus the latest, greatest, you know, shiny thing. And I think we've mentioned a couple of those. So, you know, my sort of personal rule of thumb is you know, don't be too cutting edge, right? You know, learn about it, keep your eye on the radar, keep your eye on it, but don't necessarily focus too much on, you know, on the brand new methods, and think a little bit, you know, kind of back on that curve a little bit. And then the last thing, you know, I would just point out is like we're sort of over the hump on the initial kind of introduction of machine learning and AI into a lot of you know, software products and systems, and so we're sort of past that hype curve, you know, and into the you know, maybe the ramp or the plateau of it, and so that means that there's a lot of mainstream use of machine learning, and it also means that we need to prioritize where and how we use machine learning more than ever, right? Because you know, as we mentioned before, not every project needs machine learning in particular, and not every I mean, there are other places that, you know, that desperately do, right? That actually really benefit from machine learning. So we need to be careful about it. And as opposed to earlier, where it was kind of like, let's throw it at everything, right? Let's create these AI projects that that maybe aren't as grounded in reality.
It's great that you mentioned balance, because learning and applying the new way of doing things sometimes undoes everything that you were trying to do only a week ago. That even though it works, you lose a lot of that journey to implementation. And definitely trying to strike a balance between the two is a good approach to take, and really provides a great bridge into our next topic. And Divya, I want to go to you first. Machine learning and tech in general changing by the minute. What skills, resources, or inspiration do you use to complement your work and to strengthen your perspective in machine learning?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it's changing every minute, right? So there's resources and everywhere, almost wherever you have so many people on Twitter, you have so many papers coming out, you're looking at your LinkedIn feed, or you have so many courses online to do whatever you want. But something that's really helped me to achieve or inspire me to actually follow it and like do it diligently has been a community or a group of people that I can really share things with and learn together, because doing this alone is kind of hard. Whereas if you have a reading group, or you have some kind of people like a group where you think about, hey, we are interested in this technique, and why don't we find out more about it? I'm interested in fairness, why don't we read more papers about it, or like what's going on in this field. It's much easier to do it as a group, and when you have a community. Of course it can be online as well, but finding a group whom you can share it with and learn together has been something that's made it more possible for me. Whereas in general, I mean, there are lot of resources, but how do I make sure I actually learn from them is through a community.
community is really that unifying piece, right? Where it's proof of concept, but it's also a peer group to really support that learning. And sometimes it's not enough to really read a book or watch a YouTube video or even sit through a lecture, but you need other people to really reinforce that learning. So it's a really great point. Sneha, from what you do on a daily basis, how do you sharpen your skills? What are the things that you do?
I have to agree with a lot of things Divya said. As things change so rapidly, sometimes all of the information that you see can get really overwhelming, and like you don't actually always have the time to, you know, keep up to date with everything. So I also try to do reading groups with a few people, so that way you commit to like every week, like read a new paper. I try to set aside maybe 2 hours every day for me to catch up on like conferences or papers that are published in those conferences that might be relevant to my work. And at the same time, I think the more years that you spend like in your space, you kind of get really deep into that, but you don't actually like you know, have the space and time to think about other things. So it's, I try to follow people from different industries on LinkedIn or Twitter and see what they're up to. And if I find something that's very interesting, then I try to think about ways that I could use that in my space also.
Social media is this really great unifier of people and ideas, and what's often lost is the ideas part. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And you know, from here, I think it's a really great segue to a lot of our audience Q&A that's coming in right now. So if you do have a question, please put it in the question and answer button so that we can all see it and comment. Jeff, Anton has some really good questions here. I think we'll start with part 1 and part 3. He's curious if there are any books or courses that you think do a good job of shedding more light on machine learning, and do you see cases where less data rather than more is more desirable?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think the first one, I would echo you know, previous comments about community that we were talking about. So I think having a set of resources that you use, books, courses, etc., is better than having just one. But I would say the machine learning crash course from Google, I took personally not too long ago, and you know, I know we were talking about not going too far into the trap of deep learning, but you know, and it does kind of go into deep learning pretty extensively. But I think it's a great kind of intro in terms of getting started with ML. And there's not, you know, it is a crash course, right? So you can get started and go from there. In terms of number 3, actually, I'm struggling a little bit to think of a great example for that. You know, other than the general statement of, you know, usually more data is better. You know, but I do think that you have a danger in machine learning systems of overfitting in general. So if you build a model, if you train a model that's quite good at explaining you know, a particular data set extensively, it can get too good at explaining that data set. And you know, it's not directly related to data sizes, but that's something that's important to watch out for, because you know, when you then deploy that ML system, it may see, you know, new data that it hasn't seen before and maybe a little bit different. And your, you know, your prediction quality is going to go down a little bit. So I don't know if any of the other panelists have a take with a specific example on kind of less data being more desirable. I'd be interested in that.
Definitely. And I think we'll start with Sneha, who had a recommendation for some books, and from there we'll go.
Yeah, I think recently I read 2 books I think that are great for anyone that wants to get started in machine learning, or if you're a business leader that just wants like more higher level information on how machine learning can be used in your space. I think 2 book recommendations I have. The first one is called Prediction Machines, and the second one is The Book of Why. And I think both of these are really great books for like, no matter what your skill level is a great book about machine learning that you can read.
great recommendations. And from here, I think let's go over to Anderson's question next. What is the most wanted knowledge? So I think in terms of being hired for a machine learning job, what, from your experiences, uh, what's like the most in-demand skill, or what's that number one thing that you need to have in order to be considered? So let's see, Divya, would you like to go first on this?
Yeah, I can go. So the fundamentals are the most important in machine learning, because again, there are so many new models that are coming up. But in terms of fundamentals, it's the basic ones are statistics and knowing uh, you have data, you need to know how you can process that data, and then you have a model. Model is basically an optimizer. You need to have some the basic math in you can reduce any machine learning system into simple components, and then where you basically have fundamental knowledge that you need to have is essentially statistics and math, and then you can just like uh, that's what you need. It's not like, hey, I need to know this language, I need to know Scala, I need to know Python, I need to know the specific models, meaning I need to know reinforcement learning. It's not like that. It's more about knowing the foundations and basics. That's what most people also are required, and then how to apply it is the other thing. how are, uh, how can you take a problem statement and um, convert it into a model? Like, what are you optimizing for? What metrics would you want to measure? Things like that.
Jeff, anything you'd like to add to Divya?
Yeah, just to add a couple of points on I think that's 100% right in terms of the fundamentals of statistics and mathematical approaches. I would also add to it, the human elements of, empathy, collaboration, skills, working with people. I think understanding sort of the users of the machine learning model and the system and how that fits in to a broader system is super important. So if you have great communication skills, I think that is actually something to highlight and bring into a machine learning position interview. I see that being super critical.
Great point. And just to bring everything full circle, I think fundamentals is such an important term in technology for any tech role. It doesn't matter if it's machine learning or any other application or hardware even. It's having an understanding of what the basics are, and then the application. And we've been talking all evening about application, and it really rings true, especially here in machine learning. You're building out solutions to serve different constituents. And the way that that's delivered ultimately lands on you and the team that you're working on. So it all falls back to those basic elements. So sharpening and making sure you understand that part is really crucial. And this is also coming from someone who talks with recruiters every day and who works with recruiters to help students, that they say the same exact thing. So if it is you're looking to get into the field, it's all about the basics. You start there. Juliana has, this kind of dovetails into what we were just talking about. So I want to see if anyone has anything else they want to add. She's learning programming and ML. She's very enthusiastic and wants to learn more. How can she get started and immersed in this? So I think this goes to something Jeff and Divya were talking about earlier in terms of community. So Jeff, you want to answer first?
Yeah, if you haven't already seen it, I would definitely recommend, Juliana, that you check out Kaggle. It's a great community for getting started with machine learning and data science in general. That's Kaggle. And you can actually try out machine learning experiments, projects. There you can get questions answered. You could start from other people, other data scientists work. And I bet if you look around a bit, we could also find an answer to an example of a use case where less data is more highly desirable for inference. Back to Anton's question. I bet that situation exists on Kaggle somewhere.
A really great tool to really keep in mind. Divya, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, so same, so it's like how Kaggle is there. I just would like, if you want to get started, you need to get your hands dirty. And as I said before, like, yes, fundamentals are important, but as you do that, you kind of need to like have a simple example, follow a blog, or just try with some small data set. There are many blogs out there. You could just follow a blog, or like Kaggle is also something that you could do, and work along with a simple example, and then you'll kind of feel much more confident to do more. So just get your hands dirty. Start with something.
Starting with something. I think that's the really essence of technology, is really diving in and figuring things out as you go. So really great advice there. We had one question up in the chat that I'm going to bring up from our good friend C from Fuse Machines. She's asking if you can talk a little bit more about the amount of data required to create a quality model, what that looks like if you were to measure it, and if there's a proper amount or level. Jeff, you want, Sneha, you want to take a stab at it?
Sure. I think that I don't think there's like one answer to that question, because I think it could depend on the domain, it could depend on the problem space. The good way to know is if you have metrics that you're tracking, and if you're able to tell when you're overfitting your model versus not. And that's usually the way to know how much data that you have or that is required to train a model for that specific problem that you are trying to solve.
Goes back to what we were mentioning earlier about not a one-size-fits-all solution. Definitely. Jeff, anything like to add?
Yeah, I would just add that a lot of cases you can go really far by using a pre-trained model, and then kind of adding your examples on top of it. So this is pretty frequently the case in sort of vision AI, for example, that you can use a pre-trained model that's been trained on many different types of objects already, and then you can apply a relatively small set of data, just a few dozen or maybe 100 samples. And sort of train again a new model on top of that, and that can work out quite well with a relatively small amount of data.
Great. And before we wrap things up with our discussion, which we covered so much ground in an hour, it's amazing. But if we were to, each of one of you were to give that one piece of advice to folks who really want to make their mark or pursue a career in machine learning, we talked about different tips, different tools, how to apply the skills and the knowledge. But if there's one piece of advice that you wish that you knew going into this that you could impart, what would it be? And we'll start with Jeff.
Yeah, I think I would bring it back to the human element. It's very cool technology, machine learning, but I think it's super important to have that empathy and understand that these really are systems that are designed to help and augment people. And starting from that approach, I think is really, really, really important, and maybe something that is easy to miss in the early stages when you kind of are starting to learn the technology.
Definitely. And Sneha, one piece of advice if you were to share something.
I think starting from the problem rather than starting from the approach is, I think, the more like proper way to look at problems where you can use machine learning to solve something. If you're working in other areas of tech, but you're like looking into getting into machine learning, think about problems that cannot be solved right now using the tools that you have. And then thinking about the problem and thinking about what would be the best approach to solve it can give you better ideas on how to use the right algorithms.
That's great. And Divya, if we were to wrap up with one piece of advice from you, what would it be?
So I think of machine learning is still in it's not wide enough. There's still so much scope and in so many different areas that it can be applied. So when there's so much opportunity to like explore, main thing that I would say is not to fear anything and like be persistence and like being confident, like just putting yourself in, like you will learn and not be like scared of certain things, because that's how like when something new comes up, I'm sometimes like you're kind of scared that how will I be able to handle it, but it's all about like being believing in yourself and like putting in the effort, and if you put in enough time you can definitely do it. It's not complex. If you spend enough time and you sincerely work on it, you can just do anything, and there's so much opportunity out there to like do some in machine learning. So that's my main piece of advice.
That's a really great way to cap off an incredible conversation. And I can't thank the three of you enough for really sharing your insight and really being open and honest with all of us on what you feel and what you're seeing in this field. It's really something that we're all really trying to learn as we go, and at the same time trying to figure out what are the best ways to approach it. And I think our discussion this evening really tackled all of those issues. So thank you so much to Divya, Jeff, and Sneha for joining us. And for all of you who in the audience who are with us and who are watching this, I really do appreciate your time and for taking all of the effort to inform us about what are you interested in, and for again our panelists. But before we let all of you go, a couple of events that we have coming up. So next week we go from machine learning to the people who are actually doing the machine learning outside of these companies, the startups in Silicon Valley. So we're going to Silicon Valley next week and talking to folks from the Founders Institute, a couple of venture investors. Really interesting stuff. And then after that, we also have a really interesting discussion on careers in tech. So we're talking to recruiters from Lyft, Twitter, and Medium. So if you're interested in any of that, that's linerun.co/events. So again, to our panelists, can't thank all of you enough. It's been a really incredible conversation. And thank you again to our audience for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks.